Have you ever stopped to observe the silence within yourself? Not that external silence, made of the absence of noise, but the more unsettling one that echoes when you try to find clarity, and all you hear are thoughts stumbling over each other. There is a moment, almost imperceptible, when the mind ceases to be your tool and becomes your master, and when that happens, you don't notice it right away. The feeling comes as a weight on your shoulders, a constant restlessness, a desire to be anywhere but the now. It feels like life is slipping through your fingers, and even though you're awake, it's as if you're living on autopilot. Carl Jung, with his almost surgical vision of the human soul, didn't come to offer us easy answers, but to shine lanterns into the dark corners we avoid. And one of those corners is precisely self-awareness. He warned us about the danger of ignoring the most intimate part of ourselves, the unconscious. This part is not a little box of forgotten traumas or a random childhood memory. It is, in fact, a living system that breathes with us and shapes our behavior even when we think we're in control. Many times what you call intuition or a hunch is actually your unconscious trying to manifest. But because this language isn't rational, you tend to ignore it. We prefer to follow what's logical, what's socially accepted, what seems safe. But safety comes at a price, the distancing from who we really are, and the cost is high. It's not just fatigue nor fleeting sadness. It's the constant feeling of being out of place, as if life were a play and you're on the wrong stage with lines you didn't write. This disconnection doesn't happen all at once. It sets in through small choices. When you deny a desire to please someone, when you silence your opinion out of fear of rejection, when you follow a path just because everyone said it was the right one, it's as if, little by little, you are putting your essence in a drawer and throwing away the key, and the mind, sensing that emptiness, takes control. But not with wisdom, with fear. It starts operating based on old patterns, conditionings, unresolved traumas, and then come the crises, the outbursts, the procrastination, the constant dissatisfaction. The paradox is that the more we try to dominate the mind with force, the more it rebels. It's like trying to hold back the sea with your hands. Jung proposed another path. Instead of fighting against it, learn to dialogue with it. And for that, you need courage. Courage to face what you've been avoiding, that memory you pretend doesn't hurt, that truth you'd rather not admit, the part of you that feels shame, that you judge as weak, that you try to hide even from yourself. That part is not a mistake. It is an essential fragment of your identity, and ignoring it is like trying to walk with one foot tied. Maybe you grew up hearing that you needed to be strong, productive, rational, that emotions are weaknesses and vulnerability is something to be overcome. But Jung said that what you resist persists, and more, it intensifies. That's why sometimes you explode for no reason, or see yourself repeating the same patterns, even after promising it would be different. Your mind is trying to get your attention. It's saying, look at me. I need to be understood, not suppressed. At that point, the real question is not how to silence the mind, but how to understand it. Because it carries important messages. When you feel anger, maybe there's something that needs to be asserted. When you feel sadness, maybe there's something that needs to be embraced. Every emotion is a compass, but only if you're willing to follow it to its roots. And that requires slowing down, listening, being present. The modern world pushes us out of ourselves. Technology, social media, daily demands. Everything is stimulation. Everything pulls us away from the silence needed to hear what truly matters. It's no wonder anxiety grows. People feel disconnected. So many lives seem to be stuck in a loop. But that doesn't have to be your fate. There's another possibility: to become intimate with your mind, not to control it like a tyrant, but to guide it like a partner. This partnership begins with the recognition that the mind is not an enemy. It is, many times, a scared child who learned to survive the best it could. And just like a child needs attention, affection, and listening, your mind needs presence. Jung called this process individuation, the path of becoming who you are, integrating all the parts that were previously in conflict. It's not about seeking perfection, but about building unity. And in that unity, true power is born, the power to live with authenticity. You don't need a ready-made map. You need the willingness to look inward and accept what you find. Because it is precisely there, in what you've avoided, that lies the key to your freedom. Control of the mind is not conquered through rigidity, but through deep self-acceptance. And the more you understand yourself, the less you need to hide. The mind then stops screaming. It begins to whisper, and in that whisper, you start to hear, for the first time in a long time, who you truly are. Sometimes the mind doesn't dominate us with shouts, but with constant whispers, small thoughts that day after day contaminate the way we see ourselves. A glance in the mirror, a distorted memory, a silent judgment about our own choices. This is the mind taking the wheel, guiding your life based on fears disguised as caution. And the most treacherous part is that it's convincing. It presents itself as logic, as protection, when in truth it's just trying to avoid any discomfort that reminds it of old wounds. Many of these inner voices aren't even yours. They were inherited from the upbringing you received, the culture you grew up in, from words said to you in childhood that even without realizing, you internalized. Phrases like, "You're not good enough," "This isn't for you," "Better not try," "It's going to go wrong." The mind records this as a code and starts operating based on this system. The result? You sabotage yourself, avoid risks, hide even from yourself. But there comes a point when that becomes unsustainable. The soul starts to scream for freedom, even if you don't yet understand what you're feeling. It is at this point that Jung invites us to pay attention to what we avoid. He said that the unconscious, when ignored, manifests through behaviors that seem random but aren't. A pattern of relationships that repeats, the same mistake made multiple times, the feeling of emotional déjà vu. All of this is the unconscious trying to communicate, but it doesn't use direct words. It speaks through symbols, dreams, sensations. It's like a forgotten language that we only relearn when we're willing to listen without judgment. Have you ever stopped to think about the relationships you maintain today? In how many of them can you really be yourself? Not the edited, polite, and contained version, but you with your spontaneity, your real desires, your light and your shadows. Often, what exhausts us is not the other person, but the effort we make to keep a mask on. Jung said that what we repress in ourselves tends to be projected onto others. So when someone or something deeply bothers you, there may be a mirror there. Maybe the other person's arrogance irritates you because you hide your own need for affirmation. Maybe someone else's insecurity triggers your impatience because you don't handle your own well. This understanding isn't easy. It requires a generous look inward. And above all, it requires you to stop blaming the external world for everything you feel. It's not about accepting abuse or justifying harmful behavior, but about taking responsibility for what is within your control. And your mind is, ultimately, the greatest territory you can conquer. It is within it that your freedom begins. But mental freedom is not the absence of conflict. It's knowing how to navigate them with awareness. It's being able to look at an emotion and instead of reacting ask, "What is this trying to show me?" It's recognizing that even anger can be a compass pointing to where you feel invaded. That sadness can be an invitation to pause and introspection. And that frustration may be indicating a mismatch between what you do and what you really want to live. Many people carry this confusion. They believe that mastering the mind is maintaining a constant state of peace, as if they were monks untouched by the world. But Jung reminds us that the psyche is dynamic, pulsating. It moves between opposites, light and shadow, reason and emotion, control and surrender. Mastering the mind in this context is being aware of this movement and no longer being dragged by it. It's realizing when a thought is just born of fear. It's knowing when the tiredness comes from the soul, not the body. It's stopping the repetition of patterns just because they seem familiar. And at this point, it's impossible to ignore the impact our connections have on all this. There are relationships that elevate us effortlessly, that challenge us, inspire us, make us expand. And there are those that bind us, that drain us, that turn our mind into a constant battlefield. Have you ever been with someone who seemed to steal your light just with their presence? Jung would say that this kind of relationship is not a mistake, it's a teacher, not for you to stay in it, but for you to understand what needs to be healed within yourself. The mind in these moments acts as a bridge between what you accept and what you still deny in yourself. That's why sometimes walking away from someone is not weakness, it's maturity. It's an act of self-love. And no, that doesn't mean closing your heart or building walls. It means choosing with whom you share your energy. Jung said that the collective unconscious even influences our most personal bonds. In other words, many times we're following relationship models we didn't consciously choose. But that can change. When you start listening to yourself, observing carefully how you feel around people, something transforms. You stop asking for permission to exist, and you start taking a stand. Saying no without guilt. Allowing yourself to live relationships that don't require you to shrink to fit into them. Now, answer me honestly. How many relationships do you maintain today just out of fear of being alone? Or out of habit? Or out of obligation? The mind has an immense talent for justifying comfort zones even when they hurt us, and that's not your fault. It's survival. But if you've come this far, it's because you're ready to break out of this cycle. Ready to stop being a hostage to your own mind and start guiding it toward the life you deserve to live. And before we go on, I want to make you a heartfelt invitation. If this message is touching something inside you, if these words are lighting up places where there used to be confusion, then consider subscribing to this channel. But more than that, interact with this content in a way that makes sense to you. Answer mentally or in the comments if you'd like, a single question. What was the moment in your life when you realized you were living on autopilot? This simple reflection can open powerful paths. I don't want you to comment just for the sake of it. I want you to share something meaningful that helps you see what might have been in the dark. And in doing so, you might also illuminate someone going through something similar. You don't need to wait for everything to fall apart before you start listening to yourself. The signal comes much earlier, when the enthusiasm disappears from things that once motivated you, when silence becomes uncomfortable, when your mind fills every pause with worries or demands. It's in those small cracks in everyday life that the soul whispers, something is out of place. And it's not the outside world, it's inside. It's where your vision of the world, of others, of yourself, is born. Jung taught us that the outer world is, in many ways, a reflection of our inner universe. If there's chaos inside, everything seems out of order. If there's peace inside, even challenges become manageable. That doesn't mean reality will adapt to your desires, but rather that your perception changes completely when you align with what you feel and believe. A mind in harmony doesn't need to control everything. It trusts, it flows, it chooses more clearly, without needing to please, prove, or justify every step. That's why so many people reach a point where they look around and ask, is this life really mine? The house, the job, the relationships, even the goals. Everything seems to have been chosen by someone else. This happens because the mind, when guided only by external expectations, builds a life structure based on validation, not authenticity. And then, even when everything looks right on the outside, there's a void inside. A void that isn't always sadness, but a lack of belonging to oneself. Taking control of the mind is not about eliminating that void. It's about understanding what it's trying to show you. Many times it's calling you back home, to your true values, to your forgotten dreams, to the simplicity of being who you are, without needing permission for it. But this return requires renunciation. Renunciation of the persona you built to be accepted, of the roles you assumed to be loved, of the armor you wore to avoid being hurt, and maybe the hardest part, renouncing the excuses that keep you stagnant. Jung spoke of this process as a crossing. It's not quick nor linear. At times you'll feel lost, you'll want to go back, you'll doubt everything. But in other moments, clarity will come with an almost unexplainable force. It's as if the pieces begin to fit. You realize your pains have an origin, your behaviors have a logic, that even your mistakes had something to teach. And in this understanding, a new kind of power emerges, not one that dominates through control, but one that transforms through awareness. One of the most effective ways to access this awareness is by observing the emotional patterns that repeat in your life. You know that situation that seems to come back in a new disguise. A different boss, but the same feeling of oppression. a new partner, but with the same jealousy, the same fights, a cycle of self-abandonment that seems to follow you. That's not bad luck. It's the unconscious bringing to the surface what hasn't yet been integrated. It's not punishment, it's opportunity. And the more you resist, the more it intensifies, because the mind's function isn't to punish you, but to alert you. When you start paying attention to these cycles, without victimhood and without judgment, something magical happens. You stop identifying with the pain. It ceases to be a prison and becomes a portal. You start choosing differently, acting differently, thinking differently. And slowly the world responds differently too. This transformation also requires that you protect what's most valuable, your energy. How many times have you given your time, your attention, even your love to people or situations that don't return the same care? That's not nobility, it's burnout. Jung would say that every time you neglect your boundaries, your mind screams louder. Emotional exhaustion is the warning. Discouragement is the sign. The body gets sick because the soul has been crying out for help for a long time. And here's a hard but necessary truth. Not everyone who is with you will stay when you decide to choose yourself. Some will walk away. Others will accuse you of selfishness. But it's precisely then that you begin to see who loves you for who you are and who only loved you for what you offered. And that's okay. This filtering is necessary because a balanced mind needs space to breathe, to express itself, to create. And none of that happens when you're stuck in relationships that demand you silence yourself. You deserve to be in spaces where you can be whole, where your presence is not a burden, but a blessing, where your sensitivity is not weakness, but depth, where your truth is not judged, but heard. And to find those spaces, you must first build them within yourself. The mind will only align when you stop trying to please everyone and start pleasing yourself. That's not selfishness, it's emotional maturity. Now tell me, what have you been postponing out of fear of losing someone? What are you not saying to maintain a false peace? How many times a week do you swallow words, desires, tears? If this is happening often, your mind is no longer your ally and it's become hostage to a pattern that limits you. And only you can change that. Not with great revolutions, but with small daily acts of courage. Saying no when you want to say no. Saying enough when something hurts you. Saying I deserve without feeling guilty. This is the reconnection that transforms. And if you feel something stirring inside, don't ignore it. Allow yourself to continue this journey. Sometimes, a change begins with a small question you never had the courage to answer. Maybe now is the time. The mind finds clarity when you stop looking for meaning outside and begin to listen to what's always been within. You don't need to understand everything at once. You just need to be willing not to abandon yourself anymore. There's a silent force within you, older than any memory, truer than any external opinion. This force doesn't shout, doesn't demand, doesn't fight for space. It only waits to be recognized. And when you decide to look inward with honesty, that's what you find. Carl Jung dedicated his life to understanding this essential part of the human being, the inner spark, that doesn't get confused with the noisy mind, with social roles, with imposed desires. He said our mission is not to become perfect, but whole. And this wholeness is born from the courage to integrate everything we were, everything we are, and everything we fear becoming. When you allow yourself to listen to this deep part, some truths reveal themselves. The first is that your suffering is not failure. It's an invitation, a call to change, to awakening, to reconnection with something greater than mental chaos. Have you noticed how, in moments of crisis, certain answers seem to come out of nowhere? A phrase that makes sense, a decision that finally becomes clear, a path that reveals itself. Jung called this synchronicity, those meaningful encounters between the inner and outer world that happen when you're aligned with your essence. These moments are not coincidence. They happen because your mind, your body, and your soul begin to work together. There's no more self-sabotage, no more internal struggle. There's collaboration. And that changes everything. You start making decisions with more ease because they come from self-knowledge. You start standing your ground with more confidence because you're no longer trying to prove anything to anyone. You begin to attract more authentic connections because you've stopped pretending. Life, which once felt like a series of battles, begins to feel like a journey with purpose. But that doesn't mean the challenges disappear. It means you stop seeing them as threats and start facing them as teachers. Fear still shows up, but you're no longer paralyzed by it. Doubt still comes, but you know you can get through it. Because now there's a solid foundation within you, built with conscious choices, with healthy boundaries, with respect for who you really are. That is true mental freedom, not the absence of thought, but the presence of awareness. Getting to this point isn't simple. It takes emotional discipline, self-responsibility, and above all, patience. The mind has been conditioned for years to operate in reactive mode. You don't reprogram that overnight, but every small choice matters. Every time you choose silence over noise, self-care over haste, truth over convenience, you are training your mind to return to your center. And little by little, without fanfare, you find yourself changing. Anxiety loses its grip. The past loses its hold. The future stops being a threat. Clarity begins to inhabit your days, and you make peace with the idea that not everything needs to be solved right away. Some answers come at the right time, and the mind learns to trust that flow. Jung said that everything that irritates us in others can lead us to a deeper understanding of ourselves, and everything we admire can too. Because the other is always a mirror, and the way we react to the reflection reveals what still needs to be healed or acknowledged. At this point in the journey, you begin to notice something that completely changes your relationship with the world. Your mind, when aligned, is not a problem to be solved. It is a tool for creation. It can imagine new possibilities, build solutions, nurture dreams, but only when you stop seeing it as a battlefield and start treating it as sacred ground, a place where your ideas, emotions, and experiences coexist, meet, and turn into wisdom. This wisdom, by the way, doesn't come only from what you learn. It comes from what you live, from the pain you faced, the falls you overcame, the silences you listened to. It comes from the daily decision to listen to yourself before obeying, to feel before reacting, to choose before repeating. That's what makes someone truly lucid, not the absence of problems, but the presence of meaning. And at the end of this journey, or perhaps the beginning of a new one, you look back and understand it was never about mastering the mind with force, but with presence, with humility, with truth. Jung showed us that the mind can be our greatest ally or our worst prison, and that choice is made every day in the smallest attitudes, in how you speak to yourself, in how you treat your emotions, in how you deal with discomfort, in how you honor what you feel. The question then is no longer, how do I control my mind? But how do I reconnect with who I am so that my mind can follow me on this path? Because the mind, when guided by a solid identity, becomes powerful. It serves, builds, manifests, and instead of being a burden, it becomes a bridge between your essence and your reality. If you've made it this far, know that this already says a lot about you. It means there's a living search inside you, a sincere desire to understand more, to live more authentically. And that's why I want to thank you, not with canned words, but with presence. Thank you for being here, for listening to the end, for being part of something that goes far beyond a video. This space exists because people like you exist too. People who feel deeply, who think beyond, who want more than to survive. They want to live with purpose. If this content touched you in some way, consider subscribing to the channel. Here, every word is built with the intention of creating real reflections, of awakening awareness, and of strengthening those who are ready to truly grow. And if you feel like you can contribute, share your story with us. Tell us what impacted you most in this video, what you discovered about yourself, or what you want to leave behind from now on. Your experience can inspire those who are just arriving and strengthen this community that grows based on truth, not appearance.